Greg, as always, great to see you. Thanks for giving us a bit of time. Thanks for coming and having a chat about the things that you're doing because it's pretty interesting stuff. Um, let me kick this conversation off with a by going back to the beginning. I mean, tell me about the moment when you thought this business could have a global impact. I mean, tell us about that moment.
Yeah. So that was like late 20 teens. And I was working at university, and my field is education, and in particular physical education, which so I guess in a nutshell, my whole career has been looking at how do we create environments where young people build a really positive relationship with physical activity in its broadest sense, build a positive relationship with their own physical self. That's the mission, always has been the mission. And then really beginning to be curious about, well, what can tech bring to that? How can we use it? How can
Yeah,
we leverage it for really positive outcomes for young people? And your question is a smart one to kick off with, because I think like every founder that has that light bulb moment, like you think it is like the best idea in the world. And then, you really have to stretch it and test it and interrogate it, and you still think it's the best idea in the world. So that means you've got to start asking other people. And I suppose the validation ultimately was that we had three original investors who wrote a check. And then, as the saying goes, I'll keep my language clean, stuff gets real. And
yeah,
you're like, okay, these people have really backed it. And not having been on that journey before, you know, I think the whole thing is an emotional roller coaster. But the first emotion was both the elation and then the awesome sense of responsibility that you've got other people's money to get this stuff going. So yeah, that's when we first thought, okay, there's legs in this.
yeah.
And then the next barrier, I suppose, is creating the MVP, and then, having spoken to the market, and our primary market at the moment is education. And we might get onto why that's a difficult market and why we're diversifying our market, or even ways of going into that market. Um, so you test it, you get validation from the market, you have people say, yeah, we sort of need that. It's always a challenge if you're first to market. It really is, the iPad syndrome. The only difference is Steve Jobs had, unlimited budget to tell the world why they needed an iPad, and we didn't. So first to market, and again, we might touch upon this later, the time lag of and the process of identifying need. Um, so there, and then we had first sales. Now we launched just before lockdown, so we thought, okay, the world's in a mad place.
Mm.
We were still both our founder, myself and my co-founder, were in full-time employment. So we just said, look, we're secure for a couple of years in our employment. Let's just give it to schools. It was actually really needed during lockdown. It was very useful for lockdown. That was a bit double-edged because then we became known as a lockdown tool. So when schools went back, people thought, well, that was a lockdown thing, so we don't need it anymore. So then we had to go back and do all the campaigning and education again as to why it was actually not built for lockdown. Because clearly in 2019, 2020, when we were designing it and building it, we had no idea that the world was going to be in lockdown. So yeah, that was the journey. And the first purchases for cash, that was again a real landmark moment. And since then, to be honest, every time we close on a deal this morning, and that still gives an awful lot of validation. Every time we demo and someone says, "Yeah, that's brilliant. We really need that." We are very, very aware of the potential, and that's a word I actually despise. I hate the word potential. We're sitting on something which is of high value, and our job as founders is to really leverage that and to really make sure that we're not talking about potential, but we're talking about track record, and then we're talking about the next phase of growth.
Yeah. And you touched earlier on about the roller coaster. I mean, I always think that that's one of the most difficult things about building a business. It's the fact that there's ups and there's downs and everything in between. I mean, what is it that keeps you motivated? What is it that that enables you to get up in the morning and keep riding that roller coaster? I mean,
Well,
mentally.
yeah, a deep, deep belief in what we're doing, a deep belief that we are going to do it. Um, but it is tough. It is really, really tough. And I think, you know, one of the phrases I use a lot is you don't know what you don't know. And going in as a first-time founder, not first-time business person, but we ran and exited a business, not for life-changing money or anything, but we actually exited so we could really concentrate on what we're doing now. And so we've understood the processes, the marketing, the sales, and customer service and success. That stuff like we were reasonably aware of, but going into this, you know, I think I don't think you can really describe what you go through,
Mm,
um, and how challenging that is. The depth, the level of anxiety can be huge. The
mm,
amount that, and it's about keeping that in perspective. I think is sort of one of my go-tos. But I think looking back, if someone said go back to 2018, 2019, would you do it again? I'd have to give it some serious thought. I love the journey that we're on, and I love what we're trying to do. But I had no idea that it would present the challenges that it has.
sure, sure. You've got a great proposition. I mean, and it's you can see that this thing about connecting young people to physical activities is something that is going to be valid anywhere on the planet, really. And you're a pretty motivated person, notwithstanding what you said about the challenges. I mean, tell us how you thought. I mean, how did you say, okay, well, this can be a potentially a global player. I mean, how did you then approach making that happen? I mean, just give us a sense of the kind of I mean, not the detail of how you would implement, but how did you approach that process of kind of making it happen?
Well, I think looking back, probably a little bit ad hoc. One of the things that I think I've learned a lot about is that the playbook really doesn't apply a lot of the time,
Yeah.
or it applies when a business is in a certain stage. If you're looking at cash flow and resource management, that's great if there is cash. Like, what's the playbook if there is no cash and you've got 2 months runway or no runway, and how do you manage that? And that's the emotional roller coaster, like the degree of resilience that you need,
Mm.
um, or that we've needed certainly, has been astounding. So I think looking back, like what was the business plan? We knew that we had a geographical agnostic product. As you said, this is a global issue. We're
Mm.
trying to make headway in a global problem. Um, and it's a global problem that everyone recognizes. That doesn't mean it's everyone's top priority.
No, no.
Certainly in a school, you won't get many head teachers who would not recognize the problem. But on the other hand, you don't get many head teachers who are kept awake at night about that problem.
Mm.
So, and and that's the other, interrogating and examining our own assumptions is an ongoing process. Like I said at the start, we think we've got the best product in the world because we're dealing with a problem that we think is a really, really big problem.
Mm.
Um, but the assumption that everyone thinks that, no, they don't. They clearly don't. And probably if they did, if all stakeholders thought, it probably wouldn't be a problem, to be honest,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's not that difficult to solve. It's about prioritizing it and validating it. And the fact that one of the things our tool does is monitor and evaluate and measure it and give you numbers on it. I remember when we were first talking to one of our original investors, and we were explaining the proposition, the problem and solution, and they weren't from this space at all. And they said, "Well, how is this currently monitored?" And we said, "No, that's the problem. Like, it
It
isn't."
isn't. Yeah.
And 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 they from a commercial perspective, they were from the world of commerce and investment, and everything they do is data driven, and they just couldn't get their head around that at all. They said, "One minute, so you've got countries and all sorts of organisations that are putting time, effort, resources, and a lot of cash into this, and they've got no idea if it's having any impact.
Mm.
And we're like, yeah, that is that. You said it. Like that is the issue.
It is
Um,
surreal, isn't it, really?
yeah, yeah. I mean, we always go back to London 2012 because it's just very easy to really picture that. And you know, being Londoners, we our streets were plastered with the strapline, "Inspire a Generation."
Mm.
So the idea that the games were coming to London to inspire a generation of young people to lead more active lives, and that was a £9 billion spend. Now I was sort of deeply involved in that world at the time because I was an academic, and one of the calculations was for £9 billion, every ward, not borough, not county, but every ward in the country, in the UK, could have a new sports facility. And instead, £9 billion went into what was, we all enjoyed London 2012. It was a great spectacle. And then a few years later, I was listening to the then sports minister being interviewed by journalists. And they said, well, can you present the evidence that this £9 billion? And he said, no, we haven't got any evidence. And it really was a faceplant moment. You just think, how can anyone spend £9 billion and not know if the desired outcome has been achieved or not? I mean, it's really bizarre, but that's sort of there's a bit of a rabbit hole I'm going to try and avoid going down there. But that's what we're trying to solve. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And you're on the way to doing that.
I hope
Um,
so.
yeah, and I mean, one of the other challenges about trying to have a global impact with a small team is how do you help your team with that? Because it's tough on the team as well because you haven't got a massive team, I
Yeah,
presume. I mean, how do you? And that also means you've got to have a team that perform at a relatively high level
yeah,
pretty much all the time. You haven't got a lot of slack there. I mean,
yeah,
how do you? What's your thoughts on the kind of the role that the CEO plays in kind of
yeah.
keeping the team focused on the right things? I mean, what's your
Yeah,
take on?
there's so much in that question. So
Yeah.
the role is, as a team leader, you absorb, protect the team from sometimes from the harshness of that emotional roller coaster. Try and keep them focused. Really, really clear communication. We adapt sort of lean processes that we adapted from the world of tech. We try to move at pace. The world never moves as fast as a startup wants it to move. In fact, it probably moves at about 10% of the speed that we want it to go at. We want everything now or yesterday. And, the people we're working with will regularly say, yeah, we like that. But, it might be a 6 months time. It's sales bent, isn't it? Is their budget, is their authority, is their need, and T, what's the timing? So, is it really pressing at the moment? So, protecting the team, working with the team, making sure we've got really clear goals, a really clear strategic plan, which more often than not, it could be the clearest strategic plan in the world, but it's at least edited and adapted severely.
Mm.
And sometimes it's just torn up and we start again. Um, Being flexible. And you mentioned a small team. Our roadmap is to actually never get into double figures,
Right.
uh, and we are mightily ambitious. Like we really do want millions of users, and we're talking at the moment, and again, a place I really don't want to be in talking towards a deal. I want to be talking about deals that we've done, but there's two national states that are looking at countrywide rollout at the moment. There's also some very exciting conversations here in the UK about rollout at scale.
Mm.
So one of those would bring on millions of users, and then the whole proposition is very, very different, and the learning is very different, and the robustness of all the systems that would need to be in place to support those rollouts around onboarding, etc. So the team being both excited and focused on what we need to do. And we also, to keep the team really small, we also have become really selective and discerning in what external people we work with and what value they bring to us. we've got two absolutely brilliant Neds who are pretty hands-on and at the end of the phone, and we pick their brains a lot.
Mm.
So I really like that maxim that as a founder, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, and
Yeah.
it's really having is it humility? Possibly, I can't think of a better word. The humility to think, well, actually, I know a lot of stuff about some stuff, but not the stuff that I really need to know about now. So where do I find that? And have we got it in the team, or have we? And by the team, I probably include the Neds. I probably include our developers, who, even though they're outsourced, we worked with them for 4 years, and we've got a really, really strong relationship with them. Pretty much daily communications, and yeah, they're absolutely great. So from anything technical, they will always, they're our go-to. So it's having good people around you and really making sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Remote working as well it's got its pros and cons. We do like to get face to face on a regular basis. I think that is important, and I think you've got to keep morale high. It's a rocky road.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And in terms of the other components to the kind of CEO's role, I mean, how do you see that? Do you very much see yourself as somebody that's, leading the way, leading from the front? I mean, what's your take on the other parts of the I mean, there's a big part is looking after the team, obviously, but the other parts of this kind of CEO role. I mean, how do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you've got expectation versus reality. You've got outward facing versus inward facing and internal. So outward facing, yeah, I think whether I'm comfortable with it or not, I would be the face of the business. I would be we're at a size and a place where people will phone me directly, or I will say to an onboarding customer, I'll touch base with them a month after they come on board. Like, we're still just about able to do that sort of stuff. Clearly in 3 months, I very much hope that I'm not able to do that.
Yeah.
But I think people, from a customer perspective, I think they really value that. Um, we've had people say, one customer said to me, "We've been using Microsoft for ages. Bill Gates has never given me a call to see how we're getting on." And I was like, "Yeah, well, I'm sure he's a bit busier than me, but maybe he's not busier than me, but anyway, you know what I mean." So how do I see it? I don't really know. I don't spend a lot of time looking at how I see it, to be honest. You just sort of do what you need to do this today and this week and this month, and some of that is external. I know, I'm very, very aware of that. How many meetings we have, how my time is allocated to new business, but it's a constant juggling act, because if I spend too much time chasing um, new business or going to events or being in the room, then that's time away from maybe other more important, more pressing
Mm.
matters. And we've also learned an awful lot about what are the odds. We're very wary about things like going to conferences now, because they tend to be expensive and the return rate is really poor. I'd go to a conference if I'm asked to present or speak at one, but trade stands and all of that stuff, I think there's an awful lot of spin. I'm relatively new, as I said. I was in education, even though we had a half a foot in commerce. But I'm relatively new to commerce, and one of the things I've sort of learned pretty quickly is there is you can spend an awful lot of money on an awful lot of conference providers and auxiliary services and consultants, and it's and everyone's the best in the world at what they do, and they're going to help you get to the next level. We've been on 2 or 3 accelerators. I'm not saying that they weren't valuable
Mm.
in any shape or form, but they certainly all overpromised.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we learnt bits, but was it worth 12 days? Probably not.
Yeah, yeah, it's a difficult one, that isn't it? I mean, the conventional wisdom, around the role of the CEO is that, your job is to work out what are the things that only you can do, and then
Yeah.
delegate everything else, which is fine if you employ 500 people.
Yeah.
If it's a really small team, 10, 12, whatever, I mean, it's a different situation then, isn't it? Which I think makes the role of the CEO quite a lot harder, actually.
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah,
really
and
hard.
yeah, we actually find best learning and best conversations come from other people who are facing the same challenges as ours.
Yeah.
And there's a really good guy we talked to who's down in the South Coast who's in the same sector, and he's built a really a really solid business, about 2.5 million annual turnover, and they've got a team of about 25 now. And he says that the biggest problem he faces is that he's still the best salesperson that they have.
Yeah.
And that is and I get that. Like nobody at the moment, apart from my co-founder, can talk about our product, the benefits it brings
Mm.
in the way that I can. And of course I can't, because it was my brainchild like 7 years ago. I
Mm.
started thinking, well, maybe we need to have that, and why we need to have that. And that is a challenge that we need to solve.
Yeah.
And we take huge inspiration from, certain other businesses, and how they do things. Like big businesses are really trying to, you know, I think every CEO would tell you having headspace, having time for big thinking, blue sky thinking, or just a good analysis, quiet analysis. And sometimes I can spend 2 hours looking at what HubSpot do. Like we use HubSpot
Yeah.
and looking at their services, their customer support, the resources that they use, just their structures and how they've been able to do that at scale. Because effectively, what that's doing is the role of a part of the role of a CEO. That your every touch point with the customer is exceptionally good. So, but yeah, it is really challenging to keep uh, that degree of inquiry going, and then really thinking, okay, what do we learn from that? How do we
Yeah.
apply that? When can we apply that? When would that be a priority? Because everything can be a priority, right?
That's right. And the trick is working out which is the right priority, isn't it? I
Yeah.
mean, you've touched on customers. I mean, one of the things I think that's really challenging is how do you keep track of customer expectations? And because they change. They only ever go one way, which is up in my experience. But doing business in the US is different from doing business in Germany or whatever. So, and customers have different views on how things should work. I mean, how do you I mean, I know you can use technology like HubSpot to help with those sort of things, but how do you sort of keep track of different of that kind of moving target around customer expectations?
Yeah, it's a huge question. So, if I may, Paul, I'll probably drop expectations and just talk about how you keep track of customers, not whether you've got the customers, but everything from the customer need, the language that the customers and potential customers or qualified customers are using, because that really varies. And
Yeah.
that's even though we've got a universal proposition, the application of it and the way people think and talk about it does vary, and they're working within different constraints. So a teacher in the US will have different priorities and constraints to a teacher in the UK. Our product's been used in about 25 countries. So we know that there is universal need. And we've also learned loads about how it's been used and what it's been used for. So so the solution going forward for us is really about seeking exceptionally good partners who have got a very, very strong synergy with our mission, and who we can really bring value to. So by a partner, I'm talking about an organization that might be working with 40 schools. Now, for us, it's easier to work with them, to listen to them, to provide a service for them. So that's much more around SaaS, I suppose. It's a bit of a classic SaaS model that
Yeah.
we're going to provide the technology for an organization that currently hasn't got the technology, whether that's a government or whether it's a private provider, whatever it is, for them to be able to do their thing better. And that's the direction we're going in. Selling to individual schools or groups of schools is what we've been doing, and is really challenging. We get interrogated a lot by our NEDs around cost of acquisition, time of acquisition,
Mm.
and it varies hugely. Sometimes we can close a sale in a week, and other times it's a year. And And that's not really sustainable,
No.
or certainly very challenging.
Yeah.
So yeah, working with partners is probably the way to get local responsiveness in all aspects.
Yeah.
Speak the same language, understand the needs, go to for customer support and success, trusted provider. Yeah, it brings real benefits to us, and we think we bring benefits to them.
Yeah. So in terms of, as it were, market entry strategy, what you're saying to me, if I've understood it correctly, is that you would work with partners in each of the different jurisdictions. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that helps you connect with customers. I mean, and I get the logic of that. I mean, I think it's a good strategy actually. Tell us about how you negotiate with them though, because that's also people have different cultures negotiate in different ways. Different, people like to do things in different ways. I mean, have you got any thoughts on that process of how you get to a great deal with
yeah,
each partner, and that process because
yeah,
that can be tricky. That's been my
yeah,
experience. It's quite can be.
yeah. And that's been my steepest learning curve.
Yeah,
And that's really the main contribution that our non-executives are bringing. They've been there, done that. So, um, one of the things I've learned loads about is doing the background checks, the due diligence, looking at the financial reports of the business. So we had a really good deal that I messed up on. We didn't get it over the line, and that's because we priced it too high. And our non-executive, made a few clicks on the screen and said, "You do realise that you were asking for X% of their total budget." And even though they were really enthusiastic, there was no way they were going to give you that percentage of their total budget. Now, I hadn't looked at what their total budget was. So it was the naivety that now around who am I talking to? What is their budget? Asking the right questions in those negotiations. Now, we haven't come up against a lot of sort of cultural variation or nuance. We still think transparency. Once there's clear synergy, or we're on the same page, and people are expressing the notion that they value what we're bringing to them, and we would bring value to them. Having conversations around, okay, let's look at the road to closing now. How do we do this? What do we need to do? This is what we think this deal's worth. Is that aligned to your budget? Is this timeline aligned to your thinking? Is it going to go? And having the confidence, albeit sometimes it's really painful to qualify out as well as qualify in,
Mm.
is really important. Otherwise, like, we've made the mistake of spending ages chasing something that was just never going to happen.
Yeah.
And and then you meet on meetings, the emails, all sorts of things. It was never going to happen. So really understanding and not being afraid to say, I think this is probably a bit of a waste of time. Maybe not quite that as harsh as that, but like, is this really going to happen?
Mm.
And doing that, like, the old maxim, a quick no is the second best to a quick yes. And the time sensitivity of forming these partnerships. For a startup, time is always of the essence, as I touched upon earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, and getting the right partner is critical, isn't it? If you get the wrong partner, you're going to have problems. If you get the right partner, it can really work well. I mean, so one of the challenges is also trying to work out whether they're the right partner or not. And I totally get your point. If they're not, you don't want to be wasting time there, do you?
Yeah, it's potentially reputational damage. We mitigate that because we can white label our product, so we can be in the background. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of qualifications or controls that you put in place to mitigate, but I still think there's probably a lot of gut instinct. My co-founders probably got higher levels of emotional intelligence than me, and and they'll say to me, "I don't feel good about this," and I will push and say, "Well, what's wrong with it?" And sometimes they can't articulate it, but they're normally always right. Um, and it, but and doing business with people who you trust is just it's just priceless, isn't it? Like, if there's a doubt in your mind, you're never going to get away from that. So yeah, establishing trust, establishing the relationship. Sometimes that could be surprisingly quick, and then it's like, okay, let's roll our sleeves up. Let's do the hard work before we get to the to enjoy the and benefit from this relationship. And you have to do the hard work,
Mm.
uncomfortable, comfortable as it is. We try and do business comfortably. It's not always so.
No, no, it's not. No, I would agree with that, definitely. I mean, one of the things that you've articulated there, though, is the amount of risk and uncertainty, or uncertainty and risk, perhaps. I mean, risk kind of follows uncertainty, I think, doesn't it? But I mean, give us your take on that. I mean, how do you? I mean, the thing that strikes me about businesses like yours is that there is no roadmap. I mean, yours is a completely new business. It's got a different resourcing, different team, focused on different. I mean, there isn't a checklist you can follow. You've got to work it out, haven't you? Which means inevitably there's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, how do you approach managing that uncertainty, the kind of ambiguity in these situations? I mean, what's your sort of take on that? Because that often lands on the desk of the CEO, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Um, yeah, it's a trade-off, isn't it? I remember listening to someone on the radio talking about data and what we give our data for. And obviously, it's highly topical. We're talking in the week that, or the week after, three major retailers had a cybersecurity issue. So I think everyone knows that handing over data is a risk. Um, and that's the trade-off. So I will hand over my data if I think I'm going to really reap benefits and get value from whatever service I'm giving my data for. Uh, and I might do that without a second thought. And I think it's the same in the conversation we're having here. I might there might be uncertainty, but if it's a really worthwhile deal, either commercially or because we're working with good partners or we're working with people who are going to get us in the room, um, we have to make a call all the time.
Mm.
Uh, what's the risk benefit analysis here? And I don't think it's a science. There's probably some objectivity to it. And I think you have to combine that with the vibe that you get, the amount of time and resources that it's going to require. You just take everything into account and try and make good decisions. And also you're not going to make good decisions all the time, or you're not going to make decisions that play out as you want them to. And then it's like, well, what do we learn from that? And that's the stuff we're probably reasonably good at. We're out of education, so that sort of learning loop is integral to our thinking. Embracing mistakes is integral to our thinking. What's difficult in commerce compared to education is that the mistakes um, cost you financially. In education, they can also be really costly, um, but they don't hit you hard in the pocket.
Mm. Mm. And things like when you're the difference between making a big strategic decision and the kind of everyday operational decisions. Do you have a kind of an approach to that? Because those are different, they have different consequences if you get them wrong, don't they? I mean, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, an example was our sales weren't going as well as we wanted them to go. So we really had to like lift the bonnet on that and have some uncomfortable internal conversations, mainly with myself actually. I mean, we were again facilitated and by one or two external people who helped us review that, and that's really useful though because you're accountable to someone who you might not know as well, and they're not going to take your BS. So they might ask a question: why is sales not like this? Why is the market not doing that? What is it that the market need that you're not providing? And I could say, well, I think it's this, and you get challenged back. Well, you can't tell me you think, like you need to find out. So we regularly do go back to people, but we had to then go to people who maybe had used our product and stopped using it,
Right.
and really understand, well, what was their experience. So getting good and that in itself is a tension. I'm sorry, that's not necessarily related to your question, but there's a tension there if you're a first to market product, and it goes back to that educating the market, not a phrase I like very much because it feels aloof. But really understanding the assumptions that I made about how the product would be used and operationalized, and really then understanding the challenges that people on the ground had using it, and then, well, how do we fix that? So that's your big strategic decision. Is this a product? Are we working towards ever improving product market fit? And um, and if we're not, how do we make it more compelling, easier to use, etc.? So they're big decisions for us because they're at the heart of what we're trying to do. And then, as you said, there's stuff that comes left, right, and centre
Yeah.
every day, every week. And what's the decisions we make about that? Now, one of the things we learned from our non-executive is all the hard work is done before the meeting or done before the email. And
Yeah.
it's the deep thought that, and in the hurly-burly of a day, if it, oh, just, we work on that 2 minute rule. If you can reply in 2 minutes, do it now. And sometimes we've learned, no, like you've got to, you know, uh, you've got to think slow, fast and slow, deeply and slowly. And especially going into meetings, like what is it we want to get out of this meeting? What's the strategy? How do we do it? What's the roles? Who's listening? Who's speaking? Um, and then when do we want to play our hand or put our cards on the table? So yeah, apart from that, we just use, is it urgent? Is it important? When do we have to prioritize this? But it is really, that is really challenging. I mean, I
Yeah.
could get to the end of the day, look back on the day and think, between 1 and 4, I probably didn't do anything particularly good.
Yeah. I mean, you touched earlier on data. I mean, is AI starting to um, impact on what you're doing and what your customers want to do?
From a customer point of view, um, yes, although it's not a cut, it's a big deal, but it's not at the forefront yet. Um, we've put an AI co-pilot on our product, which we're getting really positive feedback from because you know, teacher time in education, teacher time is a
Really?
really big issue at the moment. It's a high government priority, managing and reducing teacher time. So one of the operational challenges was the perception that for a teacher to get benefit from the data that we give them, they have to do work. It's effortful. So how do we then reduce that effort? AI Copilot, just even though the data's there and you can find it probably within 3 or 4 clicks or maybe within 2 minutes of looking, it's not quite the same as saying to the AI Copilot, I want to know this information, please tell me. And it's a much easier process. Um, so we've embraced it. We will continue to embrace it. We're very interested in how we can use AI learning to support kids directly. We're also very wary as a mission-driven and a company with a strong sense of ethics and a notion of social justice and the impact that we have on the environment and the ecology. We're also very wary of the cost of AI, and we're trying to learn more and more about that, listening to some critical voices who are around. Yet at the same time, how can we, it's not going to go anywhere. So we're still learning a lot about that side of things. I can't say I'm particularly confident in presenting an argument one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly going to change things.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that you can see that happening already, really. And on that, you mentioned again about sort of learning from this. I mean, and you come from the education world. I mean, when you look back on the journey, I mean, what would you say are the big things that you've learned from the experiences? What are your big
Uh,
takeaways from the journey?
so much from sort of micro skills from, as I touched upon before, managing negotiations, managing meetings, managing sales processes, through to um, self-care, care of my team, um, managing that roller coaster. It really is, every aspect of my working life has been shaken up.
Would
And
you say it's changed you as a person, as a leader, perhaps?
probably, probably need to ask people around me. Um, Probably, I don't feel particularly changed at the core, um, but it probably has. Yeah, yeah. So sometimes for the better. I think some things for the better. I'm probably much more focused than I've ever been in my life.
Right.
are much more time aware. Now that also means you can be more time anxious. Like I'm all for if we have a slow start to the day. Um, I just want to get going, and that life happens, right? So you have to be able to go with the blows and roll with it sometimes. So yeah, it probably has, but it has been um, incredibly steep learning curve, incredibly.
Yeah.
And some of that is really really thrilling. I don't want to paint a really miserable picture. Some of it is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. It's a
And
very exciting thing, isn't it? Trying to have global impact. I mean,
that's the thing, yeah.
it's a tough challenge, but it's an exciting one. I don't know.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's often overlooked. Like the nature of a startup is you're trying to do something that no one's ever done before.
Mm,
And if they had done it before, I'd go and work for the people who were doing it. And we talk to people again, going back, and I probably am a bit too skeptical about this, but people who are advised in the startup world, and almost all the people we've listened to sit within the security of the corporate world, and it's massively different world.
totally different, isn't it? Yeah.
It's so hugely different. And yeah, look, I take my hat off to them. Some of them are brilliant at business, like really analytical. They're great with projections and finance and making resources, stretch and really bringing value to stuff or marketing. Absolutely brilliant. But we have to deal with our marketing in-house
Mm.
on a daily basis. One of the biggest challenges we got to keep current, to keep present, to make sure we got good quality stuff going out on a regular basis on various platforms, to analyze it, to see whether it's hitting a mark and registering with anyone. Yeah, it's really, really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. But like most things, isn't it? I mean, doing tough things, you do learn more, I
Yeah,
think, than in other situations because
yeah,
yes, that bit of pressure helps you adapt and evolve and learn and develop. I think all those things are kind of inherent in that, aren't
yeah.
they? Let me just to wind this up. I mean, a very interesting journey. You've got a fabulous proposition. It's going to have a big positive impact as you roll it out. I mean, if you were going to offer a piece of advice to somebody who was thinking of starting the journey or a similar journey to you, I mean, what advice would you offer?
Um, One, go for it because you're always going to regret not going for it.
Mm.
Um, and it's really satisfying to build something from scratch.
Yeah.
And I think I suppose this goes back to the last question. What did you learn? I am learning and increasingly aware that you need an awful lot of money. So and this is like, again, education into business. The sort of numbers that we talk about in education, in business compared to education are ramped up times 10. Um, Generally, in education, resourcing is pretty scarce and very carefully monitored. Um, so if we get, I don't know, if we get £500,000 deal, and in education, that is a lot of money, right? And I would come to that thinking that's fantastic. And don't get me wrong, it is for a startup to get a £500,000 deal is brilliant, right? And then when I start breaking it down and we start thinking, okay, so that's about whatever £40,000 a month. Okay, that gives us this runway. And before we realise it, it's like, oh, 500,000. It's actually okay. It's good, but it's not that good, right? And you just need an awful lot of money, like development, product development. I mean, unbelievable. We've got really good value developers, really good value, and they're good at what they do, but it's still incredibly expensive. So yeah, managing runway, managing resources is so important, and really knowing, okay, if we get this amount of cash, what we're going to do with it to ensure that we're going to get more cash, and what we're going to do with it to make sure we got really good security on our runway.
Yeah. Not easy challenges, those. I mean, because
No.
you get them wrong, you derail the whole thing, don't you?
Yeah, you can easily,
Yeah.
looking back on our initial investment, it pains me the amount of money that we didn't make multiply because we used it, and some of it we just made mistakes with.
Yeah.
But like I said, mistakes are costly. You've got to accept you're gonna make them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are two types of people in the world, aren't there? People that make mistakes and people that pretend they don't. And as an entrepreneur, you have to work out whether you've screwed something up because you need to fix it pretty quickly for the reasons
Oh
you've
yeah,
just outlined, which
yeah,
is one of the things I like about working with entrepreneurs actually is they're pretty open to that actually, and they're pretty sharp. They're pretty quick to realize when something's not working, and they're pretty quick to move to fix it, which is it's a very rewarding environment to be in, I think.
yeah.
Greg, thank you for sharing that story. I mean, like I said, I mean, great proposition. I mean, I'm biased. I think that exercise and stuff is really good for people. Not, I know not everyone does, but I think it's a good thing, and what you're doing could have a really positive impact on people for all the reasons we've just talked about. So good luck going forward, and thanks for taking some time to share your story.
No, absolute pleasure. Thanks for hosting.
Cheers. See you soon, Greg.
Yeah.
Bye bye.